Yes, very good morning, students. It's been so long time. Previously, we had discussed about the inflorescence. So I'll quickly refresh your memory with a brief introduction what we have learned in the previous class. So I had discussed about the inflorescence. As you all know, what is the inflorescence? It is the arrangement of the flowers on the floral axis of a plant. We call it as inflorescence, and we had discussed two types of inflorescence, that is racemose and the cymose. Now, what is the racemose inflorescence? As I said, the main axis continues to grow, and there will be acropetal arrangement, meaning what? The younger flowers will be at the apex, whereas the older flowers will be at the base. And we quoted two examples, that is radish and mustard. Even you can consider the looping. And the cymose type of inflorescence we had discussed, that it is the main axis of the peduncle. It ends up with a flower, or it terminates with the flower, and you will see the arrangement of the flowers will be in the basipetal succession, meaning that the older or the larger flowers are at the apex, whereas the younger or the smaller flowers are at the base, right? And here we took example of the begonia, teak, bougainvillea, right? So we have considered those examples, and also had discussed about the structure of a flower with respect to the typical flower, how it looks. Okay, fine. We will continue in this class. We are going to learn the flower and its parts, as well as I will be telling you the terminologies related with respect to the flower. Fine. Now, in the previous class, we had seen that the solan end of the pedicel. Pedicel is the stalk of the flower, right? If this is the stalk of the flower, if this is the stalk of the flower, we call it as pedicel, right? We call it as a pedicel. It is a stalk of the flower. Now, the solan end of the pedicel, we call it as thalamus, right? We call this as thalamus. Even you can call them as receptacle, receptacle, right? Even we can name it as receptacle. This is the solan end of the pedicel. Now, on this, all the floral leaves are arranged. At the center, if you see, you have the bulged portion, the whorl. We call it as what? We call it as the gynoecium. Now, this is a typical gynoecium. Now, this part, we call it as what? Stigma. And this portion, which is narrow and slender, we call it as style. And this bulged portion, we call it as ovary, right? So ovary, style, stigma, all together it will make what? Gynoecium. Remember, we call it as gynoecium. Now, this is the center one, right? This is the main one. Now, next to it, what we have? We have a slender like this on both the sides. This slender stalk, we call it as the filament, and the one which we call it a lobe, bilobed structure, we call it as the anther. Anther and filament both together they make androecium. Both they make androecium. It is the male reproductive structure. Whereas this gynoecium, I'm going to write it there. Gynoecium, it is the female reproductive structure. So gynoecium and androecium, both together they are called as the reproductive organs, or they are reproductive whorls, or they are essential whorls. Remember, these are said to be essential whorls because they are involved in the event, reproduction event, right? That's why we name them as essential whorls. So the next whorl which comes, I'm going from inside to out. Even you can consider outside to inside, right? Okay, so you have a bright structure like this. This one, the bright colored structure, we call them as what? The corolla. We call them as corolla. Collection of petals. We call them as corolla. Petals are what? They are the bright color structure present next to the calyx or androecium, right? It is in between the androecium and the calyx. Now, what is this calyx? The structure? It is a leafy green structure present. This we call it as the calyx. We call it as the calyx. It is a collection, the collection of sepals, right? The collection of the sepals. We call it as calyx. So this is a typical flower. So I will just brief it once. Pedicel is the stalk of the flower. Thalamus is the swollen end of the pedicel where floral leaves are arranged on it. It is the structure on which all the floral leaves are present. Now, if you go from outside to inside, the first one is the outermost layer is calyx. Then we have corolla. Then we have androecium. Then we have androecium. Then we have gynoecium. Right? So this is how. Now this structure we call it as what? Stamen. Right? Collection of stamens we call it as androecium. Collection of carpels. This one structure what we are seeing, this is what? The carpel or pistil. Collection of carpel or pistil, we call it as gynoecium. Remember this? So this is a structure of typical flower. So you can say it's a structure of typical flower. If they ask you to draw, then you should draw like this and you should explain each and every part of that. Right? Now going further, we are going to understand the terminologies with respect to flower. What are the like terms we are going to use when describing a flower? That we are going to understand. So while describing a flower, we always use certain terminologies. Okay, terminologies. What are those terminologies? One by one, we will understand. We'll try to understand it. The first is the bisexual flower. The bisexual flower. What is the meaning of bisexual flower? Bisexual, as the name suggests here, when both the essential words like are present, like androecium and gynoecium, androecium and gynoecium, when both these essential words are present, such a flower we call it as bisexual flower. Also, you can call it as perfect flower. Perfect flower. Okay, perfect flower. When both the essential words, you know, there are two essential words. One is androecium and the other one is gynoecium. Androecium is what? It is the male reproductive structure. Gynoecium is what? It is the female reproductive structure. Now, when these both the words are present in a flower, such a flower we name it as the bisexual flower. Okay. Second, here you can consider P, example P and hibiscus. P and hibiscus. Okay. The next one is unisexual flower. Unisexual flower. Now, what is this unisexual flower? A flower which has either androecium or gynoecium. When a flower has either androecium or gynoecium, but never both. Such flowers we call it as unisexual flower. You can call it as imperfect flower. Imperfect flower. Okay, a flower either it has androecium or gynoecium. Okay, now a flower having only androecium, that is male reproductive structure. A flower androecium, such flower we call it as staminate flower. We call it as staminate flower. Okay, a flower which is having only androecium but there is no gynoecium, such flower we call it as staminate flowers. Now, when a flower is having only gynoecium but it is not having androecium, such flower we call it as, such flower what we call? We call it as pistillate. Pistillate flower. Okay, pistillate flower. So what is the example for unisexual flower? You can consider maize. Maize is the example for the unisexual flower. Now what are the other terms? Bisexual flower, unisexual flower, then you will see the trimerous. Trimerous. There are the arrangement of these words, the individual members, how many number they are present in a flower. For example, you have sepals 4, 3, 5 like this. You can call the flower as trimerous, tetramerous and pentamerous. Okay, what is trimerous? When floral appendages or whorl are present in multiple of 3, we call it as the trimerous flower. Now what is tetramerous? What is tetramerous? As the name indicates, tetra means 4. So when floral appendages or whorl are present in multiple of 4, we call it as tetramerous flower. And when the flower are present in the multiple of 5, then we call it as pentamerous. So trimerous when the floral appendages are present in the multiple of 3. Tetramerous when the floral appendages are present in the multiple of 4. Pentamerous when the floral appendages are present in the multiple of 5. So these are the names you should remember. When I say trimerous flower, you should immediately understand that there are 3 petals or 3 sepals, right? So they are arranged 3 of them. When I say tetra, 4. When I say penta, 4, 5. Okay, so this is how you should recognize or understand. And then, as you know, in division angiosperms, there are 2 classes. One is monocotyledons and the other one is dicotyledons. Now, when a seed is single cotyledon, then we say it as monocotyledon. When a seed has 2 cotyledons, then we can say it as dicotyledon. So, in angiosperm, there are 2 classes, monocotyledon and dicotyledon. Now, here there is some characteristic feature. In monocotyledonous plants, you will see the flowers are always trimerous. There are a few exceptions, but generally, overall, if you see, a monocotyledon plant will definitely have a trimerous flowers. Remember this and kindly note. So, this generally trimerous flowers are seen. Trimerous flowers are seen in monocotyledon, monocotyledonous plants. Monocotyledonous plants. Whereas the pentamerous, flowers, pentamerous flowers are seen, observed in dicotyledonous plants. Okay, kindly note this. Fine. So what we have learned, a bisexual flower, meaning both the essential whorls are present. Such flower we call it as bisexual flower. It is said to be a perfect flower. Example is pea and hibiscus. When you see the unisexual flower, it has either the androecium, such flower we call it as staminate, and when it has only gynoecium, such flowers we call it as pistillate flower. Now, when the floral appendages, that is whorls, are present in the multiple of 3, we call it as trimerous. When it is present in the multiple of 4, we call it as tetramerous. And if it is present in the multiple of 5, we call it as pentamerous. Okay, so tri, tetra, penta. Remember this. And trimerous flowers are generally observed in the monocotyledonous plants, whereas the pentamerous flowers are generally observed in the dicotyledonous plants. Okay, I hope it is clear to you. Now, moving forward, we'll try to understand few more terminologies related to the flower, that is bracteate and ebracteate. What is this bracteate? Now, before that, we need to understand bracts. What is a bract? Bract is a reduced leaf. It is a reduced leaf found at the base of pedicel of a plant. We call it as bract. Those flowers that have bracts, we call it as bracteate flowers. We call them as bracteate flowers, meaning present. Bracts are presents. Bracts are present. You can consider the example of Liliaceae, Solanaceae, Fabaceae, where the bracts are present. Now, when the bracts are absent, such flowers we call it as ebracteate. We call them as ebracteate, meaning the bracts are absent. The bracts are absent. Example, you can take Brachycetes family. Okay, Brachycetes family. Now, these are the few terminologies. Okay, and a clematis flower. A clematis flower. What is this a clematis flower? When a flower which does not have the calyx, the corolla, and the perianth, such naked flower, we call it as a clematis flower. Meaning what? They are the naked flowers. Naked flowers which don't have neither the calyx nor corolla. They are absent. We call them as the clematis flower. Now, clematis or monoclematis. What is monoclematis? When mono means single, calyx, corolla when they are not distinct only perianth is present, such we call it as perianth is seen. Such flowers we call it as monoclematis. Similarly, you have diclematis. Diclematis flowers, meaning that both the calyx and corolla are present. Calyx and corolla present, and it looks attractive. The flower looks attractive because it has all the components. Such beautiful flower, or we call it as complete flower. Okay. So diclematis flowers generally it will have the calyx and corolla accessory walls. Both it will have. When calyx and corolla is not distinct, as you see in lily. In lily, you will see that the calyx and corolla they are not distinct. So such flowers we call it as where there is a calyx and corolla absent, and there is a presence of one more word, the perianth. We call it as the perianth. The members of the perianth we call it as tepals. Okay, and tepals are arranged spirally in concentric circles. We get what? Perianth. Perianth is a whorl. Remember, when calyx and corolla, when they are not distinct, instead of them you will see perianth. Example, you should consider this lily, which is very important, and they have given in your NCERT textbook. Okay. Now, one marks question generally they will ask. What is inflorescence, what is thalamus, what is pedicel, right? And what is the bracteate flowers, what is imbracteate flowers, ebracteate flowers. All these type of one mark question will be generally seen in first PU exams, right? Now, the arrangement of the flowers, the arrangement of the floral parts or floral organs, the arrangement of the floral parts or floral organs around the floral axis, we call it as the floral symmetry. We call it as the floral symmetry. Flower symmetry. What is flower symmetry? The arrangement of floral organs around the axis of flower, what we call is known as floral symmetry. Remember this, we call it as floral symmetry. The arrangement of the floral organs around the axis of the flower is known as floral symmetry. Generally, there are three types of floral symmetry that we observe. Let's understand them. The first one is actinomorphic. The first one is actinomorphic, or you can call it as radial or the regular. Okay, so actinomorphic, radial or regular type of symmetry. What is this actinomorphic? The symbol used is plus, always remember, like this. The symbol is this. Remember this symbol, which I am going to explain in future class. Remember this symbol. Always the symbol to represent actinomorphic flowers is plus. They are enclosed in a circle. Now, what is this actinomorphic or regular or the radial symmetry? Now, when a flower, I'm going to write it, a flower, when a flower can be, when a flower can be divided into two equal radial halves in a radial or vertical plane passing through the center, passing through the center, we call it as actinomorphic. What is the meaning? Simple. If you see a flower, and you cut it by any plane, any vertical plane or radial plane, any vertical plane or radial plane like this, when you cut it, passing through the center, this is the center. So you should get two equal halves. Here it should be same, this is also should be same. Such flowers we call it as actinomorphic, right? Actinomorphic meaning what? When you cut a flower by a radial plane passing through the center, it should give two equal, two similar halves. Any vertical plane you cut it, like this if you cut, it should get two equal halves. If you cut by this plane, it should give the equal. If you cut like this, you should get. If you cut by this plane, you should get two equal halves. So when you cut a flower by a radial plane or a vertical plane passing through the center, it should give you two halves. Okay, halves, two halves. Such flowers we call it as actinomorphic flowers. And where you generally see the examples are very important. Examples: mustard, datura, chili, MDC. Remember this: mustard, datura, chili are the examples you should definitely remember for actinomorphic symmetry. Okay. Second one, zygomorphic or the bilateral symmetry. What is this zygomorphic or bilateral symmetry? Now, we said in actinomorphic, when a flower can be divided into two equal radial halves in a radial plane or a vertical plane, in any, it should be any, okay, in any radial plane, any radial or vertical plane. The change is here: if a flower is cut into two similar halves, is cut or divide into two similar halves, in a particular, in only one particular, okay, in only one particular vertical plane passing through the center. Such flower we call it as zygomorphic or bilateral symmetry. When a flower is cut into two similar halves by only one particular, okay, by only one particular vertical plane passing through the center, we call it as zygomorphic. How it is? I will write here up. This one will be very large. Okay, so such flower you can cut it by only one plane, so that it will give you. So such this you should consider as zygomorphic, or you can say bilateral symmetry. Next, there is a third symmetry which we call it as the asymmetry or the irregular one. The third symmetry is the third symmetry is asymmetric or irregular. In this type of symmetry, you will see that it cannot be divided. The flower cannot be divided, cannot be cut or divided in two similar halves by any plane. By any plane, remember this, it cannot be cut. It cannot be cut by any plane passing through the center. You call it as the asymmetric or irregular. Example is canopy. See here, the flower is irregular, meaning it does not have a well-defined shape. Okay, one petal is very small, the other one is medium. So if there is, we can say there is no any plane. When you cut it, it will not give you two halves. Such flower we call it as asymmetric flower. Okay, I hope it is clear to you. We had first actinomorphic symmetry, in which you will have two equal halves when you cut it by any radial plane. No, you cut it horizontally, vertically, diagonally, you will have two equal halves. Such flower we call it as actinomorphic. Example is MDC, that is mustard, datura and chili. Whereas zygomorphic examples, you should know that the P for zygomorphic, P gulmohar, and bean, cassia also. Okay, so these are the examples for zygomorphic symmetry. And the example for this asymmetry or the irregular flower is the canopy. Examples are critically important, so I want you to remember them. Okay. Moving forward, the next is the position of ovary on thalamus, or you can say the position of floral parts on thalamus. The position of floral parts on thalamus, depending upon the position of the floral parts with respect to ovary on the thalamus. Flowers are of three types. This is with respect to the position of, we can say, the relative position of ovary changes with respect to the floral parts. So, depending on the position of the floral parts, so with respect to the ovary of the flower, there are three types of flowers. The first one is the hypogynous. The second one is Perigynas, and the third one is Epigynus. So the name suggests gynous. Gynous means what? Gynoecium. So if all the floral parts are below the gynoecium, we call that condition as hypogynoecium. When the floral parts are at the same level as the ovary is there, such flower we call it as perigynous. When the gynoecium is positioned below, whereas all the floral parts are above it. Okay, here all the floral parts are above the ovary. In such condition, we call it as epigynous. So we will see one by one. What is hypogynous? As I said, here the gynoecium is at above, meaning what it is above. So okay, where right here you can see all the floral parts are below the ovary, right? The here this is thalamus, right? The swollen part of the pedicel. This is thalamus. Now, here what they have given, depending upon the position of the floral parts with respect to ovary on the thalamus, ovary here, right? Now, if you see that every part, the stamen, the petal or sepal, they are originating from below the ovary. Such we call it as hypogynoecium. Hypogynoecium. Hypogynous condition. What are the examples? Examples for this hypogynous: mustard, brinjal, China rose, and petunia are example for this hypogynous condition, right? So here you will see that the ovary is above the floral parts. So here we call it as superior ovary. Superior ovary. And the condition is hypogynous condition, where the floral parts are positioned below the ovary. Such ovary we call it as superior ovary, and the condition is hypogynous flower. Okay, the next one is the Perigynus. Peri means the thalamus is the rim of the thalamus holds the rim or the periphery of the thalamus holds all the appendages, the floral parts, and like this. Okay, so you can see that this is the periphery rim of the thalamus. This is called as rim of the thalamus, which is having the calyx, corolla, and rhizome, whereas the ovary is at equal length at the same level. Okay, what is perigynous? When the gynoecium is at the center and at the rim of the thalamus, if you see the floral parts arranged and are at the same level, the ovary and the floral parts are at the same level. Such condition we call it as the perigynous condition. Remember this, that we call it as perigynous condition. What are the examples for this perigynous? Plum, peach, and rose. These are the example for perigynous condition. In your NCERT book, they have given two diagrams for the perigynous, so you can consider any one of them. Okay. The third type of position of gynoecium is the epigynous. Meaning what? Here, the gynoecium is situated below, whereas the floral parts are above the gynoecium. Now, here you can see the ovary is completely fused with the thalamus, as well as it is below the floral parts. Floral parts are above the ovary. Such condition we call it as what? We call it as the epigynous. Epigynous meaning what? Here the gynoecium is below the floral parts. Here the ovary is said to be inferior. Here I said it is superior. Here I said inferior. This should be half inferior. Remember this, because the ovary is positioned below, whereas the floral parts are on the rim or on the periphery of the thalamus. Such condition we call it as the perigynous, half inferior. Okay, here epigynous means the ovary is below, all the floral parts are on the thalamus, and the ovary is fused here. Remember, it has been fused. Examples for this is guava, cucumber, bitter gourd, and ray florets of sunflower. Ray florets of sunflower. So these are the examples. Students, again and again I am telling you, examples are very important. They may ask at a NEET level, if you go, examples are very important. Okay, so you should remember by any means, you should remember that the examples you should remember. Okay, you should try to remember by any means. No, you write it, practice it, okay, then you should know, at least you should be able to tell, quote few examples for each condition, okay. So hypogynous, perigynous, epigynous, these are the three types of positions seen with respect to the ovary. Position of floral parts with respect to ovary. Remember, okay. So three diagrams you should remember, where the gynoecium, when it is above the other floral parts, when the gynoecium is above the floral parts, we say it as hypogynous. When the gynoecium and the floral parts are at the periphery, meaning they are at the same level, such condition we call it as perigynous. And the condition where the ovary is positioned below and it has fused with the thalamus, such condition we call it as epigynous. Hypogynous is superior ovary, perigynous is half inferior ovary, and epigynous is the inferior ovary. And what are the examples for hypogynous? We should remember mustard, brinjal, C for China rose, and the petunia. These are the examples we should remember. And for perigynous, we should remember plum, peach, rose. Okay. And for epigynous, we should remember the guava, cucumber, apple. You can consider. Then the bitter gourd, and then ray florets of sunflower. These are the examples for the epigynous. I hope it is clear to you. If you have any doubts, please do let me know. Okay, I will sort it out. Now this is it for today's class. Tomorrow we are going to start with parts of the flower, where we are going to learn individually about the calyx, the corolla, the androecium, the gynoecium, various terms related to those floral leaves. We are going to understand in detail about them. For now, that's it. Okay, thank you.